I'm gathered here in a duo with my good friend Michael Vrasitulis. We've known each other for quite some time, I think half a decade at this time. And we've had this idea for maybe not as long as we've known each other, but also quite a decent amount of time to start a podcast together and speak about matters of mental health. That was our first idea. But basically, all of our conversations have this tendency to evolve and spread, branch into different topics that interest us, like spirituality, philosophy, politics, metaphysics. It's just all very intertwined, and I just think we have a great chemistry. So we're gathered here now, not knowing what the name of our podcast will be, but knowing full well that it's going to be awesome, and that's something that drives us on. Michael has come up with a topic that's been very interesting, and we've been actually discussing it at some length, but I still feel the true discussion of it is ahead of us. And it's the topic of uh, it's characterized, I think, with being quite fitting for this podcast, in that it's kind of on the edge of, again, metaphysics, mental health issues, philosophy, spirituality, and everything else that interests us. And that is Masochistic Epistemology. It is a way of seeing reality, it is a way of feeling, and finally, it's also a way of living and a big problem to overcome. And as it's Michael who actually introduced me to this very term, I'm going to give him the stage when it comes to expanding on it some more.
Okay, so you actually want me to expand, but I'm going to start with an understandable summarization, let's say, which is essentially the concept of masochistic epistemology is the idea that if it hurts, it's true. And I think it's a sort of mindset that very often accompanies depression, where the epistemological mechanism of the human essentially sets as a criterion of what is real the worst possible state of things to be, essentially. So it correlates with depressed people not being able to see the positive side of things, let's say, or see a positive future, or even trust that something might be true for not a horrible bad reason, let's say. And on a more personal level, I think it also goes to self-hatred very much, which you and I have discussed a lot. And yeah, it's a huge topic with a lot of tentacles touching different areas of the human condition, let's say, and human civilization. So that's pretty much the whole concept. But the best thing we can do with that is to just hold, grab one of those tendrils at random and just go wild with ranting on it. So I'm giving it back to you to find one of those tendrils to start conversation.
Let's make it personal. Why do we feel it's a subject worth discussing? Why is it, again, to repeat this word, personal to us? I think the answer would be that I don't know about you, but I've surely experienced it or have been experiencing it for quite a long time, struggling with severe depression. And you giving the term to it, actually helped me to conceptualize and understand what I'm going through. And we also have some friends who go through it, and in fact, can even to an extent observe a culture that's going through it. So yeah, I'm just going to give that to you. Like, what's the thing that makes you light up about this subject?
Sure. So for me, I think the time period that I most deeply experienced this phenomenon, let's say, this state of perception, I think was the period after I had started taking an SSRI for quite some time, but before I got on an MDRI. And it was a period where I could do all the things that I was not able to do before the SSRI, but I could get no satisfaction and no sense of meaning from anything I was doing. So I would write a story. I would be happy with how I conceptualized the story, how I wrote it in terms of language. I was happy with how the end result would be, but I would feel nothing, no sense of meaning and pleasure from either the process or the end result. And I remember this kind of very strongly from those days. Yeah, you want to say
Well, that
something?
sounds like normal anhedonia. How does it? How does the thing we discussed?
I think it. Yeah. So I'm not saying that this specific thing is masochistic epistemology. It isn't. But that the period during which I had a peak of masochistic epistemology was mostly defined by that feeling. So I'm kind of setting the, the structure around the context. So yeah, it was during that where I could essentially have a functional life, but I could never imagine. I couldn't. My mind would not let me imagine a potential future in which I would have a good life. It was, for me, it was not even a ridiculous notion. It was a notion out of possibility. Every sort of scenario I imagined for my future could only allow itself to be constructed with this idea that every stage of this path would contain depression and a bad life in some way. So imagining a future where things would improve, my mind would immediately go to the idea of, don't be an idiot. You know how things are. You've been disappointed with this kind of expectation in the past. You know that everything that will go on from now on will be, the bad outcome. To oversimplify it, and to a degree, this was conscious. To another degree, it was subconscious. But it had feet in both those realms of consciousness, I would say. And that was one aspect. Like one other aspect that was very strong with me, and that was also strong with me throughout my life in general, this thought, this like mental parasite. But during that period, it was the strongest. I could never imagine women being interested in me. For example, I might be interacting in a social circle. There would be a woman who would show some interest in me, and my mind would immediately go to the idea of, oh, she's just interested in my knowledge or my mind or what I have to say, but there is no possibility in the world and all parallel universes that you might be sexually attracted. And I think I had also, so this kind of thinking had also made me reach a conclusion, like an epistemology of psychology, let's say, in which I was convinced that the only thing value that people find, or that maybe even I have, is my mind. I think my mind is the only thing I never lost some sort of belief in, let's say. Not that I thought that I had them like this super genius, once in civilization or anything like that. But I knew that I had a decent mind, that I could come up with good ideas, that I could do some good academic work. I never lost faith in that. But I reached the conclusion that that is pretty much the only thing that people may want from me. And that any notion of people being interested in the more human side cannot by any way be true. So if things, my thoughts, if they align themselves with this idea that the only thing that people want from me is my mind, then that scenario would seem true to me. Any sort of, straying off the path of that my thoughts might make, this idea that, oh, maybe this person or this girl might be interested in showing me some tenderness, not necessarily sexual or romantic, but so that, no, that can't be, So don't even bother trying to pursue that, because the only thing you will do in the end is, make yourself seem weak, which will make you hate yourself a little bit more. And other people will just go away from you because people despise seeing weakness in others, which to a certain degree, that last thing is true. But in that state of thinking, I think that maximizes to an unbelievable degree. So yeah, that's something for me. If you want, you can comment or go into your own personal recitation.
Yeah, there's a lot of things
of this phenomenon.
There's actually a lot of things I want to say. At a certain point, I started wondering if I should be taking notes, because there's at least 3 ways which I can go with that. Like, the first thing that really needs to be stressed here is that people do not realize to what extent depression is a mental illness. And what it entails is that it's not only about affecting your mood, it's about clouding your judgment severely and not making you not able to actually judge reality as it is. And how it presents itself is that, as you said, it's not even about you reacting in a given manner to an event or a vision. It's not like you feel sad about something. It's just that you cannot even conceptualize feeling in a different way. The thought does not occur in your mind. And I remember in my very darkest days of depression 5 years ago, in my first hardcore depressive episode that hit me at 18, to be honest, that wasn't my first hardcore depressive episode, but it was the most hardcore of my life to this day, I think. I just remember, drinking tea and thinking of days when that would give me any pleasure. Because at this point, my soul and my brain were so deprived of resources that would allow me to feel any joy, that it wasn't that I didn't feel pleasure. It was that it wasn't conceivable to me that pleasure was possible in this universe. And that's something that, sounds completely absurd to anybody who hasn't experienced that, but it's really that severe. You're basically insane to a great extent when you're depressed, when you're severely depressed, to be sure, and to an extent that people don't fully grasp to this very day, I think, even though, the talk about depression and openness about it went very far. I think still many people have not very accurate visions about that. And even if you're depressed yourself, it's something that's very easy to forget. It's not about your mood, it's about your thoughts not being rational. And that's something very important to remember. And to tie it to the topic, and to kind of simplify it all, it was basically that you didn't feel, or you couldn't even conceive, that a woman would be attracted to you, for the simple reason that would make you feel good. And that's something that couldn't be allowed, by the demon that was consuming you. And the other thing I wanted to say is that it reminds me of what Stephen Pressfield wrote in his books. He focuses in his writing on what he terms resistance, which is basically procrastination, but he gives it a more spiritual, rich definition that's sometimes new agey, but I think there's a lot of very sound advice in his writings. And he says that resistance is always lying, always cheating, always full of shit, and if you believe in what it says, you deserve what you get, basically. And what he means by that is, actually, your depression, your inner demons can create elaborate schemes to trick you. It's not just like you have this, oh, it's a bad day and you're terrible. It's that, these sublime constructions will be put forth by your subconscious automatically to your conscious mind. And it's not just that they will seem probable, it's that they will have great allure on the aesthetic and spiritual level. Like, for example, what you said, this thing about, not trusting that your life will ever be good or that you will be accepted by a woman. These are things that, have this scent of, oh, I'm not naive, I'm this enlightened individual. I'm experienced, existentially, and stuff like that. It's very easy to sell this, for this to be sold by your demons to you as, being elevated, as being, this supreme supreme gentleman, to quote the famous mass killer, this supreme individual who's enlightened, and you're just above that. You're this bohemian artist that's like above the Philistine endeavors of being happy, the truth as it is, etc., etc. And it's not in your case or my case and many other. But there are other schemes that will be put forth, and the thing is, like, it needs to be stressed. It's not just like you'll be given simple things. You'll be actually, fed. You'll be fucking manipulated at length by your own subconscious to believe that your life is shit, and that things are true because they make you feel bad.
Yeah. That's actually an excellent commentary and all of that. And I actually want to, branch off of that and, or actually go deeper in a couple of issues, a couple of points you mentioned, which is, this idea of inner demons, and also the idea of how much people don't understand that depression is a mental illness. There's this condition called psychotic, and in some ways, essentially, it is an extreme form of masochistic epistemology. In most cases, it manifests with severe negative delusions. Let's say, this sort of masochistic epistemology magnifies to an extent where, it's a spectrum, really. You can't say this is where it cuts off, but it's essentially a magnification of this sort of thing. In rare cases, though, and that's the interesting thing, in rare cases, psychotic depression manifests not only with delusions, but also with hallucinations. So this is an instance where those inner demons, the micro-personalities that rule your depression, essentially, actually gain a real voice in your head in some way. It can really lead to that. It can really, in rare cases, it can lead to the point where you're so depressed that you're actually hallucinating voices in your head telling you how shitty everything is. And so this is one aspect of people not understanding the severity of depression. And the other thing is that you really understand how much depression really is a mental illness, and to a degree even a physical illness, when you happen to start being on the right kind of pills. And for example, I mentioned that period I was in where I was already taking the SSRI but not the NGRI, and I went to my shrink and I told him, like, Doc, I know you're like conservative with pills, but I really do feel that I'm 2 steps away from psychotic. And he took that very seriously, and he actually agreed that I needed something more than an SSRI. So he put me on an NDRI, and in 5 days, my outlook on the world had already started changing. And in a little bit more than that, it had changed to the degree where I could imagine the potential for a better life. And I packed up my huge ivory tower and moved to Athens and started a new life. And it actually has ended up being good. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I wouldn't have fixed essentially the chemical, the imbalance of neurochemistry within my physical brain. It's so much of actual illness. Depression is so much of an actual illness. And yeah, you're totally right that people don't get it. They don't get it. Yeah. So back to you.
Yeah, it's the same thing with me. Like, some time ago, my dosage of venlafaxine has been increased, and I've been hit very much by side effects of lamotrigine, another medication I was taking, and it was just devastating. I actually had very little experience with negative side effects of meds up to this point, and it was the first time that this has really affected me. And I was completely devastated, completely paralyzed by anxiety. My sleep was just terrible. To this very point, there's actually one thing I'm still struggling with. Like, I either cannot sleep or I sleep for 12, 14, 15 hours. This has also much to do with depression, I think, with me just, running away from reality, either consciously or more often subconsciously. But yeah, the thing is, I was completely devastated. And then the last weekend, there were 2 days where I actually felt flashes of joy. And it was like, thoughts would come, negative thoughts about me, me never presenting any value in this world. And a voice would arise, a voice of strength that would say, like, no, go away, that's bullshit. And I was like, wow, like, who's this warrior? Where is he from, And, that was something novel to me. And it's actually the thing I'm the most proud of in my life, that in my darkest days of depression, like I described, I actually clinged on to the purely rational devotion to the fact that life can be good and can be joyous. Because, yeah, it had all the, from some perspective, it was rational, but from the emotional standard, because, it's something I knew, on a purely mental level, like purely premises, not feelings, not spirit. But, on the spiritual level, it was like pure faith. Like, I just needed to force myself to believe it, because everything was telling me that life is just one big bit of suffering, and I need to end it, and I need to run away as fast as possible. And yeah, that's something that kept me going. And actually, yeah, it's like there's, therapy is very much a necessary thing. You just need somebody from the outside with some psychological knowledge that can look into you and observe your behavior, your feelings, and tell you something about that from the outside. But oftentimes, like, we cannot generalize, of course, but oftentimes there are some cases, of mild depression that can go away with just, making your lifestyle a little bit healthier, like, I don't know, sleeping habits, diet, exercise, and thinking habits, stuff like that. But many times, medication, as you said, they are something you just cannot run away from. You just need them because there is a point you can get to where just some emotional states are completely blocked to you, like a character in the game. You just don't have enough points, like mana points in your brain, quite literally, to just feel something. Like right now, like as I said, I was actually, feeling like, oh, like this platonic notion of remembering past life almost, or something like this moment of, oh, I remember this feeling like of life being good. I had flashes of me running through the garden with a wooden sword and stuff like that. Like, oh, joy. I kind of tasted for a while now. How long haven't I seen you, my dear old friend? Like that.
Oh yeah, yeah, man. I completely understand the metaphor. It's actually very and so something very interesting that you said that I think is worth commenting on, where you said that essentially what got you through a lot of things was a faith that things can be better. And I think this is a good indication that epistemology, or better said, the ontology of epistemology, is to a great extent a matter of faith. I think it's like the perceptive, okay, the perceptive mechanism that we all have all that we have is pretty much shared by all humanity in terms of the basic mechanism. But the narrative of interpretation of that is really, really different. I think that's the thing that people can't understand. They're like, they know that you see the same thing as they do, everyday life and everything. But most people don't have the concept of how much of a difference it makes that our inner narrative, our inner epistemological and ontological narrative changes how that perceived data is interpreted to a great degree. And so another point on how much depression is a mental illness, because this is very strongly related to that. I remember there was an experimental treatment. There was this woman who was treatment resistant to every possible antidepressant. So this to clarify, this was in the era before ketamine was approved as an antidepressant. So we don't know how that would have worked. But she was resistant to any kind of antidepressant during that time, and so she accepted an experimental treatment where she had a microchip implanted in her brain. Every time a huge depressive episode would come on, she would just press an external button and she would feel good again. So, people really don't understand that there are mechanisms inside us, both in terms of psychological narrative and in even, very graspable physical aspect that make the experience of being completely different for different sets of people. So yeah, back to you.
I want to, the atlas inside me shrugs, and I am deeply concerned about you saying that faith is fundamental to perception. Could you elaborate on that, you subjectivist fiend?
I'm not a subjectivist. I'm a phenomenologist. You Randian punk. So okay, look, I think epistemology is based on two things essentially. Okay, it's based on an external perception of what kind of structures work, so have graspable, repeatable effects, let's say, and the other side of that is how the human mind interprets the mechanism behind that effectiveness. Okay, so how you perceive whatever you perceive doesn't change the fact that aeroplanes might still fly. Okay, but you might be able to make a completely different narrative behind how that functionality comes about, that in a strange way might be equally functional in terms of reaching that point that will create a functional effect. Like, for example, okay, we know that the ayahuasca mixture allows DMT to not be pretty much destroyed by the enzymes in your stomach, and so it can go to your brain, and we understand that on a chemical level. And the shamans understood that effect, that drinking this mixture will get you hallucinating. But the narrative they had behind it was that the gods came down and told us what plants to mix. Now, obviously, our narrative is much greater in terms of functionality, in terms of what we can repeat with as an effect with those plants and what we can do. But in the end, even with that narrative that the shamans had, they could having ayahuasca and knowing that it works and being able to repeat the ritual. So you know what I mean? I'm not negating the ontological realism of outside structures, not at all. And I'm definitely not negating the criterion of functionality, because I think that the criterion of functionality is the most crucial aspect to civilization and survival. But there is also an interpretation of all those phenomena that can greatly differ, but essentially keep those phenomena intentionally repeating themselves, although the narrative behind them is completely different. So kind of that, I could probably, if I had time, I could make a much better exegesis of this, but for now it'll have to do. So back to you. I'm going to let the spirit of Ayn Rand take over your body and tell me how much I suck. So.
Yeah, actually, the thing is, I'm not really convinced as to the potential productivity of this tangent, for the simple reason that we actually talked for hours about, your ontology and my ontology, really. And, it was like, it went for 3 hours and you were like, oh, I would need more time to expand on that. Like, these are complicated things. But,
okay, so let's go back.
No, let me speak. Let me speak.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're both like that can be summarized this way. Yeah, but I just wanted to say that like, just glancing at it, I didn't see anything that I would outward disagree with in your statements and descriptions of your metaphysics of epistemology. But outside of, the most worrying thing for me was like speaking about the criterion of functionality, because I do not think that functionality can be really the functionality and objective nature of things, of existence, are two things that can be viewed separately, really, because they follow one from another. So you kind of, I feel a foul taste of pragmatist theory of truth here. So I kind of, sharpen my sword. But yeah, beyond that, like, yeah, I just know that it sounded like the thing about us discussing ontology for hours and being like, oh, we would need more time, like, is the most narcissistic thing I think I've said in a long time. But it was literally that, like, I'm not lying. So yeah, like, we were smelling the farts of our own intellectual enlightenment to a great extent. But hey, that's what this podcast is for. Yeah, so maybe return from this discussion to the notion of, to more grounded view of things. Like, one thing I think would lend itself to some interesting conversation is culture, and in general what I said, because I know you agree with me, because I'm right, that this masochistic epistemology thing has a great way of marketing itself. Like, Satan is actually, a great marketing guy. And, there are many disguises this demon can take, can veil itself in, to not even make you think of questioning how obvious it is that it hurts, so it's true. And I think it permeates our culture to an extent. Like, it's something we spoke about at length, I think all of us, in the stream with the Axis of Empires we did a few days ago. That it's even the modern culture that, in the 80s we had a lot of, pop songs about triumph, love, about about life feeling good in general. And nowadays it seems like pop music is dominated by, it's still sex, drugs, and rock and roll to an extent, but it's not like in a happy view. All these trap songs and things like Billie Eilish. It's so like pessimistic in this manner of, ooh, I know life sucks because it's just the way it is, and I see it for what it is, and it's kind of like you're not allowed to be happy anymore. It's kind of like you're a naive fool if you're happy, and whenever there's some happiness expressed, it must be ironic, because you can't really be happy about things. You would be a fool if you were to be in such a state. Do you agree with that assessment? I know it's generalizing as all hell,
yeah,
but
I do agree, and I think I came up with a good metaphor about how you described this difference between like the 80s and music now. And obviously music is always a drug to a certain extent, but in the 80s, it's like music was cocaine and LSD, and now it's just Xanax, something like that. Yeah. No,
Yeah, I
go
just
ahead.
need to interrupt you right now because there's actually
Sure, sure.
something my cousin remarked about some time ago. And yeah, we both have next to zero experience with drugs, but outside of music and other legal substances like that. And of course, the taste of your lips, my beloved Hellenic friend. But besides that, um, yeah,
Oh,
but
you slutty Slav.
but the thing is, like actually, this change in aesthetics, she remarked, can be seen in the change of the taste for drugs, because weed and alcohol are feel good. It's a party. Let's pick up some chicks and stuff like that. Uh, kind of substances, whereas Xanax and things promoted in some by some artists, if we can call them this way, of today. These are downers. These are things that you don't take because there are chicks around you and your friends and some music and good time, but because life sucks and let's kind of perform this ritual of life sucking and us knowing about it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, very good. Yeah, there's a reason why, let's say, metaphors about drug use are actually quite on point, because it really shows how much essentially brain chemistry there is behind the mechanism that combines our psychology to culture itself. So yeah, I think that's actually a very apt metaphor. And yeah, we could really go on this. I really like Jordan Peterson's ramblings about psychedelics. He doesn't do that much now, but yeah, in like older videos, he's very interested in that. And yes, like there is even the stoned ape theory, that which accredits the evolution from the more ape-like human ancestor to something more like what we are now, to the accidental consumption of psychedelic mushrooms. So and who knows if that's true or not? Probably not, but maybe there's an aspect of it that's true, especially in terms of uh, the creation of ritual. But yeah, all of that really goes to show that brain chemistry is not the alpha and the omega, but an axis without which none of this works. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. And something I just thought about, which is maybe very simplistic, but it just dawned upon me that everything is a drug to some extent. Everything affects your brain chemistry. And it's just a difference that some things you put down your throat as a pill, and some things you just look at or listen to. You can feel it that way, like reality is a drug in a way, because everything affects your brain and changes its structures and its chemistry.
Yeah, and it's like, for example, music or art. Music very specifically, because I think there's something primal to rhythm and vibration. It really has in a way, psychedelic effect, like not hallucinogenic, but psychedelic. Really has an effect on let's say the state of your psychology to a very great degree. And there are even things like Stendhal syndrome, where you're faced with such great beauty that you faint, for example. And that
There's
actually is
quite a
something
cool movie by
documented.
this name, by the way.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's quite a cool
Go
movie
ahead.
by under that name, by Dario Argento. It's from the later period of his career. So yeah, it's kind of average, but it's very twisted, like all movies by Dario Argento. So I recommend it from that perspective. Like a lot of very perverse sexual motifs there and weird stuff in general. So yeah, if you like weird horror movies, it's something for you definitely. Yeah, but
Yeah,
return to your
certainly,
to your.
certainly. Yeah, yeah. We could actually go on a tangent of, we actually kind of left behind masochistic epistemology and almost got to the point of saying how much better life is with drugs or something like that. So yeah, we should probably go back on topic. Not that these things aren't interesting, but they can be another episode. Um, so yeah, I would like, because I went into my personal experiences with masochistic epistemology, and you went into some of yours mainly through commenting on what I said. So I would like you to give some examples from your own life.
Hmm. Maybe, yeah, one thing I can say is, for example, uh, I'm doing work-related stuff. I'm busy, and I see on my phone a notification that my boss messaged me on Messenger, and I immediately think that I must have screwed something up terribly, and I'm just paralyzed with fear. And it later turned out that they actually had a job offer for me, stuff like that. Like, the proper approach should be completely neutral to that, like, or maybe some interest. Certainly not, uh, thinking already that something negative must have happened, or, like in my case, paralyzing fear. Just one example, and all of my life is like that, basically, to lesser or greater extent in at different points. Uh, yeah, like actually a perfect illustration of that is a very common thing that I've experienced, and it's kind of a textbook thing that depressed people experience. That when you go, that anywhere when you hear some people laughing, your immediate thought is that they're laughing at you, even though like there's no indication then that that's the case. It's just that it's the most painful interpretation of that event, so that's what you automatically assume without even thinking.
Oh yeah, and there's something very interesting about all of this, because the difference between, for example, psychotic depression and, let's say, schizophrenia, which is which both entail delusions, let's say, is that uh, in schizophrenia the delusions might be like completely out of this world, but in psychotic depression the delusions are unlikely, but all of them are completely plausible. So it's even more difficult for a therapist to get you out of that through logic, for example, because the patient will always be able to demonstrate how perfectly plausible this train of thought is. And yeah, so another thing that I now that you mentioned, the message from the boss and everything, like one thing that I experienced like a couple of days ago, and I was surprised by it, because I was out of this mindset for a very long time, especially after the NDRI. So I now I'm in the final stage of finishing my PhD. So I got into the notifications on the philosophy department's internet page, so that see if anything has changed, if I need to do some enrollment for the semester or anything like that, typical bullshit. And I saw a notification that essentially an announcement that essentially meant that the secretary of the postgraduate program was replaced, and all of us in the postgraduate program were very much reliant on that secretary, because he was very helpful and very good and everything. And at this point that I am right now, the only thing really after writing and getting the corrections for my PhD is pretty much bureaucracy that will very easily happen. But seeing that this very helpful secretary was probably gone, I, without realizing, went into a sort of panic and started thinking of scenarios in which I don't get my PhD and what kind of jobs I should be looking for. So, even after all the therapy I've done, all the right medication, this kind of thinking actually creates a sort of trauma, like almost brain damage, that sticks its claws inside you, and no matter how far you get from that, the synapse is always there, and it's just waiting to be reignited. So yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, depression is a habit. You kind of go on about this psychotic depression thing, and I think it's important to stress that, it's just a tangent, and we're speaking about, general depression as such, without this psychotic element to it necessarily, because, even depression in itself, has a delusion is not a good term in the psychiatric sense, because I think it has some definitions that, normal distorted thinking we're speaking of doesn't, fit into, but, delusion, it's a fitting term, like delusions in the more general literary sense. It makes you delusional in that you're just completely inaccurate in your perception of reality. But where I was going with that...
Sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah.
In this case, I'm using delusion in the very specific psychiatric sense, and it is a criterion for psychotic depression. So
yeah. It's just
I was. Yeah. So yeah, just to clarify. Yeah. Go ahead.
To repeat what I was saying, I wanted to say that quote unquote normal depression is also delusional, quote unquote, but I can't apply this term,
Sure.
I can apply this term in the general sense, not in the medical sense, is what I wanted to stress, because it fits, but it doesn't fit, in the official lingo where it means something specific. Yeah, I was going somewhere with that. Yeah, I know. I just wanted to say that you remarked that the synapses stay there. Like, depression is a habit, every day, and every depressive thought, just leaves its mark. And when these electric currents flow through your brain, like each time you thought something negative, it strengthens those connections. So actually, it takes a lot of work to get rid of such thoughts that, manifest themselves physically in your brain, because, thoughts are, even though that's kind of, just amazing to think of, but, thoughts are something physical, really.
Yeah. I really like this description of habit, and I also think it really ends up in like almost neurological damage. I remember a few months ago. This has actually changed lately, but at that point it was still very very present, let's say. So I had visited my shrink in my hometown, and he asked about how my life is going and everything. And actually, my life was going pretty good, and I felt really good. I even felt happy. And I told him that I'm not complaining at all, because I really am much better, and not just much better, I'm happy. I always have the knowledge that deep down inside me, there is and I described it this way, there is a life-shaped hole. And he actually told me that this is normal and to be expected. It's like the neurological damage that years of severe depression will leave on you. And it's kind of terrifying to think about. But yeah, so back to you.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing you're left with, it's a terrible trap, in that even though when you think you've identified your problems, it's very easy to be lost in the world where all the solutions you find are just another traps put there by masochistic epistemology to further trick you. Like, it's very easy to think basically to have some version of the problem is that I'm terrible put there, and some even, very, a very, how would I put it, trickily veiled version of you need to self-flagellate yourself as a solution put there, is just very, very easy and very appealing to you. And again, it has this feeling of being truthful to you because you're predisposed this way. So it's just very easy to lock yourself down in this spiral where self-hatred is the solution for self-hatred.
That's very on point. And that's actually what I want to suggest, that you mentioned self-flagellation, but then you even mentioned self-hatred. And I think self-hatred is something we need to talk about. And I think that's best done through personal examples. So if you want to go ahead.
Maybe you start with that. Like, there's too many in my case, so go on.
What? Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm actually confused. I want you to start, but you should. You said I should go first.
Yeah, I said there's too many examples that come to my mind for me to know what to start
Sorry,
with.
yeah.
So.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I think I'm lucky enough that self-hatred was not one of my main problems, and it wasn't to the degree that I've seen with other people, with friends of ours, you know. But it definitely was there, but it manifested as guilt, you know. So you know, I have this, you know, I have all this dark aesthetic and everything, but some people are actually quite surprised to see that on a psychological level, I'm actually very Christian, and so. You know, you and I have discussed once that, and I told you that with individuation comes self-awareness, and with self-awareness comes a very strong sense of guilt for everything you might have done wrong, or at least not even in the best way now.
Yeah.
So the form self-hatred takes in me is like merciless in cases where I have done something, mainly something that might have hurt somebody else. That really crushes me. Yeah. Years ago, it used to also be about things where I would have embarrassed myself or something like that. But then I learned to embrace the cringe, and that was very liberating. But yeah, so with me, the self-hatred comes in this form of Christian guilt, let's say. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very appropriate, especially for me, as you've been blessed. That's a funny word in this context. You've been blessed by, you know, being raised in an Orthodox culture, not like Orthodox as an adjective, but as a noun for the Orthodox Church, Eastern Orthodoxy. Whereas I was raised in the Catholic world, and that's something that comes up very often in our conversations because it just really shaped us. You know, it's something you can't run away from. Even though I wasn't exactly raised as a religious person. Even though I kind of was. It's a complicated topic, but these are just the things that permeate your culture, and you absorb it unwillingly. And I just didn't know why I was so affected by it. Really, where there are so many people who grow up, you know, completely seemingly oblivious to it, really. I'm kind of contradicting myself because previously I said that you absorb it willingly or not, but other people seem not to be, you know, to put it straightforwardly, harmed by the Catholic culture of Poland as much as me. But whatever the case might be with that, what it comes down to is like, again, the answer is always one thing and the negative thing, and in Catholicism there's this idea that the answer is always your guilt. And in Catholicism, like, yeah, you can sell the idea in some interpretations. It can be sold quite convincingly that it's not about self-flagellation, it's about you knowing that you fall short and you just need to blah blah blah. But no, actually, Catholicism masturbates about suffering and masturbates with suffering and in suffering. It's just one big orgy of, oh, I'm so fucking terrible, and repeating that I'm so fucking terrible makes me just so great. and it's just so narcissistic, but also so, yeah, it has hallmarks of many mental diseases and personality disorders, basically. And it's something I just can't really break away from, because guilt is, as with you, it's very much a shaping feeling and mechanism for me, and has always been. And yeah, it is important to religion, and it is also oftentimes important to depression as well, because feelings of overwhelming guilt are oftentimes associated with it.
Yeah, yeah, true. I'm reminded of during our early conversations where I was trying to give you examples of how, like, let's say, an Orthodox culture is different than a Catholic one in some ways, at least in how this thing permeates the culture. I told you that example where you know, like years ago, in the days of my grandfather, a guy came, who was a lumberjack. He came back like for weeks after being in the forest, and he came back to his wife, and essentially he asked his wife if she was down to fuck, and she said, yeah, and she said, okay, and it was Easter Sunday, so she said, it was no, sorry, it was Good Friday, or no, fuck. Anyway, it was
Some
around
holiday.
and yeah. And she said, we can't have sex yet. The bell needs to ring first, the church bells. And so he couldn't wait for like 3 hours, and he snuck into the church and rang the bell himself so that he could fuck, And so not that this kind of thing will happen all the time in Orthodox culture, but there is this the difference that there is this that there you don't have the legalism that the Catholics have. So in an Orthodox culture, and none of this is absolute, but we're just putting it in boxes to be able to discuss it. So in Orthodox culture, you might be hit with guilt about having done something. But in Catholicism, on top of that, you also have the idea that not only your personal guilt, but the ontologically horrid idea that you have broken the supreme, So there's this terrifying aspect to it then. But something that the Catholics also have that the Orthodox don't is a tradition of even corporeal self-punishment. That's actually very interesting. Yeah.
Corporeal self-punishment? What do you mean by that?
Self-flagellation, or wearing girdles with inverted nails that always bite into your flesh, and using pain as a way of worship, essentially, or absolution. Yeah.
Yeah, it is present. It just dawned upon me that we're going for an hour already, and I still have this feeling that, to our audience, probably we're still kind of just hinting at something and don't really know how to state it. Whereas I remember that before our conversation, we stumbled upon a great illustration, like the greatest possible illustration, because it's also a very popular and just a great work of art. What I want to say is that, something that illustrates what we speak about or are trying to speak about is the poem The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, obviously. In that, the thing is, this raven appears, and the guy very quickly notices that it can say just one thing. And you would think that this thing can have any meaning, really. You can do anything with it. It's just a bird repeating one word for all that we know, even though the context is very gloomy and everything is dressed in this gloomy attack of this man's mind. But as it takes him very little time after perceiving that this bird has just one function to use just one function to torture himself. He can just say nevermore, the bird, and the man just goes on to ask questions to which this answer will provide the most amount of pain. And the reason is that, it feels the most accurate, it feels the most truthful to him. And that's masochistic epistemology in a nutshell, I think.
Yes. On that, what you said, that it feels most accurate. In masochistic epistemology, pain is reality affirming. It's so strong, and you're very correct about the Raven, that essentially all the questions he asks is because he wants the negative answer. And every time he makes this the questions more grand, and in the end, like, he starts asking, tell me if I will find some surcease of sorrow, and then he ends up, tell me if Lenore will wait for me in paradise, in Eden, and of course he escalates, and always knowing that the answer will be nevermore. And it's, of course, this this I'm not necessarily sure if it's self-punishment or an attempt of reality affirmation. I mean, it's the boundaries are very thin there. And I'm reminded of some work I did on Poe in years ago in a comparative literature class, where essentially I posited that the paper was called "Why is Poe's Beloved Always Dead?" And so my explanation for that was that by that essentially the grave is a lid that protects the beloved in a perfect state from the vicissitudes of life. So although that might not seem completely related, I think it's related to this idea of the need for a sense of control. So, and control is very much bound to reality affirmation. So, he always asks questions to which he will get a negative answer, because that despair, that pain, clarifies that yes, he is in some way in control of reality. And in the case of the dead beloved, by having the beloved dead, he has a sort of control over joy, even. And it's so twisted, and that's the interesting part.
That's very interesting. Don't you think, in a way, depression is very easy in a very twisted way, in that it's predictable, and thus you maybe feel in control to an extent? It's just something I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, it's that's the interesting thing, that it's, as you say, it's very predictable. It's very predictable. And if you have gone through depression and and have a very basic talent in seeing patterns, then you can see another person, and from like a few things you can immediately guess in what stage of that process they are and how it's going to develop depending on circumstances. And that's that's the devilish part of the depression, that it's simple, but it's very simple to understand, but it's extremely difficult to escape. And so, for example, what is a labyrinth? You can easily understand what a labyrinth is. It's a configuration of structures made in a way so that you will easily find your way in it and very unlikely get out of it. It's a very easy concept. But the fact that you understand so easily what a labyrinth is helps you jack shit, in terms of getting out of it. So it's you're very much on point there.
Yeah, and it's based on very simple premises, but then it goes on to create those labyrinthine constructions inside your mind. That what's the answer to my problem? So it's just that I'm a failure, and I must understand that I'm a fucking failure, and that's my life. It's that put in very simplistic terms, but it will it can take very very complicated, very intricate forms. Like one form is all of the different kinds of this. How would you call it? Like this aloof aloof, decadent artist, that, oh, I just know here in my ivory tower that this world of mortals is but flesh destined to rot,
Thank you for describing me. Yeah, pretty much, but it's true. Yeah, it's a good. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. It's like, for example, now that you mention it, like for me the concept of the wizard and the ivory tower, and the ivory tower itself, it has many aspects. But one of those aspects that doesn't negate the others, but also that is very much part of all the other aspects, is it's also a way of coping. It's cope to great extent. And there are healthy ways of coping. There are unhealthy ways of coping, and all of that is on the spectrum. But yes, it's cope to a great extent. So yeah.
Yeah, it's like what you said about what you elaborated upon in your Ghost of Adolescence podcast. I think it was quite excellent. That, yeah, I really like what you're saying, because it displays, it will be just a rimming festival here, but it displays some virtues of yours in that you're very much aware of what it is and you're not ashamed of it. Whereas it's very easy for people to be, oh, I'm not doing that to be praised, or, oh, I don't expect XYZ, whereas, it's very uncommon to see somebody who's like, yeah, I'm doing that because XYZ. What about that? Yeah, and yeah, it's true that I just went on into more loose thinking about how healthy and important it is to not hide who you are, because that's very tempting. It's very tempting to sell yourself as somebody who you're not. Whereas, my therapist always remarks this story about, I think Socrates or somebody, that, somebody comes up to him and, he's like, you're just, you're doing all of that because you think you're better, and it serves to, help you with these complexes and that, and in reality you're just that. And, the guy answers that, it's as if he knew me. He has no surprise. He has no feeling of, being unmasked. He's just, yeah, that's me. Like, I'm a human being. That's how I roll. I'm not trying to pretend to be anybody. And that's something very interesting about your work, as I said, oftentimes, that, yeah, I would think you're the most, the most narcissistic piece of shit ever, judging by some of your output. But, I was very surprised, and still I'm very surprised, that you're actually quite down to earth and quite modest. So that's interesting. Like, what do you think helped you achieve that?
Well, there's it's again complicated, but I think one of the things that actually make me reach this point is accepting my flaws and telling the truth about my flaws in some way absolves me of my flaws, of the guilt of my flaws. So the guilt plays a role in me becoming self-aware and honest. But it's tricky, because it's not the guilt by itself. It's guilt that comes together with self-awareness and in a certain path of individuation. Because if you don't have those aspects, guilt can just make you, crawl into a hole and hide for the rest of your life. But yeah, so in my case, all of that comes together and just goes there. And the thing that you said, that from the outside, you thought that I was the biggest narcissistic piece of shit. With me having put out there all my flaws and being honest about them and accepting them, that gives me a freedom to allow myself to do these ridiculous theatrics. And the reason I'm doing them is just because I enjoy them. So if you allow the combination of self-awareness and, to a certain degree, you burn down the social aspects of your ego, not the psychological ego, the social ego, the persona. If you allow that to burn down the persona, you reach a point where you can actually be kind enough to yourself to just allow yourself to do the things that you enjoy without focusing on what they mean to others. Now, I think it's something like that. It's much more complicated, but I think that is an important axis of it. So yeah.
So you basically think that this feeling of guilt and this persona, these are both things that are disarmed with you being publicly truthful about your shortcomings.
Oh yes, yeah, and but not when you do it in a form of self-flagellation because of yourself. It's not about making it's not about me making a video and saying, look at me world, I'm such a piece of shit, I'm so horrible, I'm all of that, because we have friends that do that, and I can understand them, I do, but that's not the sort of acceptance of your flaws that gets out of that, because it's not acceptance of your flaws, self-flagellation because you can't bear the fact that you have those flaws. But it's a different thing when you go and say, I have these flaws. It would be nice if I didn't have them. I'm working on maybe less, but I accept them. It's okay that I'm flawed, and I'm just live the best way I can, accepting that. But that depends not being interested, or let's say cutting yourself off from let's say this social OCD, this compulsion to be a certain way socially. It really has to do with the persona not ruling you, but just being a jacket that you need to put on when you leave your house. It's something like that.
I just need to interrupt because that's very much where
Go.
masochistic epistemology comes in, and we're very much on point here. I just want to convince everybody that is actually a tangent that's relevant, because
No.
masochistic epistemology will do its fucking best to sell you self-flagellation before other people as actual modesty, and that's one of these fucking most terrible traps that they can set for you.
Yeah. And in the end, the irony is that through this process, through convincing you that self-flagellation is modesty, masochistic epistemology actually makes you a narcissistic attention whore. But from the other side, you're not grandiose; you're just vulnerable to the point of self-flagellation. But again, it's a in a way narcissistic cry for attention. Or let's put it in a more in a better way. It's a narcissistic cry for help, if you know what I mean.
Yes, is that you want your personality, your persona to be, we want your persona to be confirmed by others. It's just that the only difference is that one persona is I'm great and the other persona is, I'm worthless. And you still want to hear, oh yes, you're great, or oh yes, you're worthless. And that's what you depend on, really.
Yeah. I think the best way to sum it up and to understand how fucked up it is that essentially it is you wanting the sins of your persona to be absolved and forgiven by the personas of others. And that's completely fucked up, man, if you think about it, because it has nothing to do with your true self. It's all the shadow play between personas that are essentially just a collection of social presentation. And this reminds me of, this is why social psychology is so fucked up, because it thinks that there is no such thing as the ego, as the true self, and that everything is just persona. So it ends up being a science of personas, and that's why it gets to such horrible and teratogenic even political beliefs, I would say.
That's interesting what you said. I would like to get what you mean by that. Like, why do you think the need for affirmation of a persona necessarily needs to interaction just between personas? I mean, other people could possibly, speak from their true self, not their persona. So why do you think that? I don't really get that point.
No, of course you can have that desire to for you, your true self, to interact with other people's true selves in a way that is affirming. And that's actually healthy. That's not a bad thing. But where it becomes unhealthy is the point where it's not a communication between, the egos of you and the others, but the personas. And the case of self-flagellation, I think, is only about personas. So this specific case of self-flagellation is only about personas, if you get what I mean.
Not really. Like, it's here who puts your persona forward, not your true self. But why the others? Because you said it's necessarily only between personas. So you imply that other people will respond with their personas. Why not their true selves instead?
Because if you expected to be absolved by the true selves of others, you would understand that everybody's true self has flaws. So nobody can cast the first. But a persona is something shiny that we put on to hide our flaws, essentially. And the persona is able to pretend that it is without sin.
That's true. It's kind of like, it's a self-defeating cause to, put forth your persona, and like it's in fact it's very insincere, is that you fapping about you being terrible, it's not really you, it's just another, narcissistic tentacle of you, if you know what I mean.
Exactly.
And it's just, it's just self-defeating. Like, an apt example from my personal life comes up. Like, it's the whole realm, like the whole can of worms has been opened by that. Like, the distinction between healthy, I really detest the word modesty, because it has been, it's just terrible, all it means in most people's minds. But much because of this reason. So, but let's change it to, to objective assessment of yourself. Let's use that instead of modesty. Masochistic epistemology leads you to just for you to be to sell you, self-flagellation as objective assessment of yourself. And one example I can give of that, like, it's something that has popped out in many personal. For the most obvious way it manifests is like you start apologizing for you being terrible, and it's like, it's actually, sort of a stereotype. Like a toxic girlfriend will do something like that. Like, stereotypically, girlfriend, it can be a boyfriend as well. Is that it's mostly like stereotypically associated with women. It's not like there's some,
Sure.
objective measure to it. But there's like this thing where you'll experience emotional abuse, and then the apology will be, excuse me, I'm terrible. And, it's actually not only this context. Like, it's something quite common to hear that. And not only in, in the context of relationships, not only from women. But, when you hear, excuse me, I'm terrible, it's not a real apology. It's just, your narcissistic cry for, affirmation of your persona of, oh, yes, oh, no, you're not, for either, oh, yes, you're terrible, and then you can revel in your own self-hatred, or no, you're not terrible, and then you can revel, in you being, being, appeased in that state. So, but what I wanted to go with that, unless you have something to add there and you can't resist that.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to go like, I had this experience. I was with my cousin, and I actually hit on a girl. She kind of just approached us, and I just asked for her number. And the way I did that was, I said, I'll be a creep, and I'll ask for a contact with you, for a way to contact you. And she hesitantly agreed and gave me her Facebook, and then she kind of, didn't care about me too much, because there's this tendency that, girls will give you a number or give you their Facebook or something, and then ignore you, because that's easier emotionally for them to just, rather than just to reject you outright, because it just feels bad to reject people, so it's easier to reject you that way. But where I wanted to go with that is, then my cousin, confronted me, and then it was like, why the fuck did you say that? Like, I'll be creepy and ask you about that. Like, there's nothing creepy about that. And when you say that it's creepy, like what you say to this person is like, I think of myself as of a creepy person, and you're selling this image to this person who has no prior knowledge of you, and you're just doing your best to paint yourself as a terrible human being, basically. And it's self-deprecating humor can often manifest itself in ways like that. Like, there are ways in which you can use self-deprecating humor to show that you're not a buffoon, that you're not narcissistic, and there are ways that you can use it to show that you are deeply narcissistic in this negative narcissism sort of way that we've described.
Yeah, I think in cases of vulnerable narcissism, self-deprecating humor doesn't end up making anybody laugh. It just makes everybody around you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, because it's very confusing. Like, what do you want?
Yeah.
What do you want from me? Like, the communicate. Like, what the fuck do you want? Do you want me to like kiss your ass and say that you're great, or do you want me to confirm that you're terrible? Like, what do you expect of me? It's very uncomfortable to be put in such a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like self-deprecating humor in the case of vulnerable narcissism is just it's essentially a way of crying for attention. It's the same as going and saying, "Oh, look at me! I feel so horrible. Please say something good about me." But it's done in a way that the vulnerable narcissist thinks is a bit more dignified, I think. But the truth is that if people can't immediately see through, they are nevertheless just creeped out or feeling uncomfortable, and that pretty much ends up in them wanting to distance themselves from you. So you don't even get the unhealthy positive confirmation you kind of need. It's a vicious circle. It's very interesting though.
Yeah, because the thing is, like, everybody is imperfect, but by saying all the time how I'm deeply aware of me being stupid, or I don't know, you're going to do anything, and are just, I know it'll be terrible, but, or, stuff like that you can apply to everything. It's not that you show yourself as being, self-aware. You're just showing yourself as a narcissistic asshole,
Yeah, true. And an example of how your intention with self-deprecating humor shows. I think people really, you can see in people's reaction, that they instinctively get if you're self-deprecating out of vulnerable narcissism, or just because you actually can make a joke about yourself. Like something I do kind of like not really as an experiment, but it ends up being something interesting, is that after my testicular cancer, I reached the idea that having one testicle is a source for comedy gold, essentially. So I always make one bold jokes. And it mainly comes from just my family being very much into sexual humor and stuff like that. So it kind of combined in my mind. And never have I encountered people when where they are made feeling uncomfortable about me making those jokes, and you from that you can tell what's behind the joke, I think.
Yes. There's a word that's very much overused to the point that it kind of lost its meaning. But the proper word for the natural reaction that you get when somebody uses self-deprecating humor in this narcissistic manner is cringe. It's just extremely cringy to perceive something like that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And something something very interesting that I've noticed, since you also alluded to that, is that I get some people who knew me from like before, and then they just take a look, or don't really know me, or just have heard of me, and then take a look at my channel, and they find it cringy to the point where they're almost angry about it, and they come to me with the intent of making me feel bad about how cringy it is. And my response is, yeah, I know it's completely cringy. That's one of the reasons I like it. And it's interesting to see that once you say that, but in a calm way and not in a defensive, the other person immediately drops the attack. And I've had cases where people come to me with the intention of making me feel bad about being cringy, and they end up being very interested in what I have to say on a much more positive level. So I think the way cringe interacts with our immediate psychological mechanisms actually very deeply rooted.
Yeah, it's something I thought about very much. Again, my cousin pops up because we actually recorded a short video where we discussed this subject. I don't know if we published that, but there's this obsession with cringe as of late in the internet culture, and I think what it comes down to, all of it, this subject, is that as you said, like the idea of oh God. No, I don't want to go into the discussion of original sin in the Catholic versus Orthodox interpretation, because that would be like half an hour tangent for us again on religion. But you perfectly know what I want to say with that. But
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's that everybody has natural shortcomings, as we allude to all the time, and
Mm.
and everybody is cringe. Everybody does stuff that is humiliating to an extent, because we all strive to be good, and yet we repeatedly fall short of what we want to achieve. But the thing is that that people need to forgive themselves for that, or even better, embrace that fact. And
Yes.
and it really shows in our culture in that these pop songs, the cynicism of this pessimistic music that's, I think, mired in this masochistic epistemology approach, is that we will show weakness, we will show vulnerability by being joyful, by being cringy, by being theatrical. Look at how much of modern music, for example, I can see it in heavy metal, for example, my realm. Like in the 1980s, there were lots of bands that reveled in theatrics. Like I mentioned Manowar in our stream, where they literally dressed in furs and had plastic swords and stuff like that. It was just cringy to an unbelievable extent, but they just went with it. And they were fully serious in something fully cringy, and they were fully aware of its cringe, and yet it was serious. And that's the reason it was beautiful. In opera, for example, there's a 50-year-old fat woman, singing about how she loves this romance with her beloved, and she's my mother always always remarked this famous part in some opera, where there was a 50-year-old woman, playing the role of a girl, and her beloved there, and there was a dialogue like, "How old are you?" 16. And cringe is kind of wired into some elements of our culture. You'll probably I don't need to prod you too much to go onto for a long monologue about cringe and theater and how they relate. But yeah, basically is that we're kind of afraid to be human. It's what it comes down to. We're afraid to show that we have different sides. We're afraid to show we're imperfect. We're afraid to show that we have this hunger for emotion and for things elevated. I think it may have something to do with our, hunger for ritual, for something religious, something metaphysical and transcendent as well. So yeah, I've given you like 10 different points where you can go on to very, very long monologue. So I'll just let you wing it.
We're kind of over an hour and a half, so I don't want to go into a big monologue, but I think one way, I just thought of this now during our discussion, that one way to put this that I think makes it very understandable is that if Christian had embraced the cringe, Christian obviously doesn't have the mental capacity to do that, so it's not Christian's fault. But if Christian had embraced the cringe, by now Christian would be a complete hero of the internet, like a mythical figure, not just seen as a lol cow, but pretty much a hero in some aspect. I think that says a lot about this.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it would just be his intent that would change the entire interpretation that one would have of his actions.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think you alluded to the fact that some summary is what's awaiting us. And yeah, I feel that in the future we'll need to make sure that we have it really figured out what we want to say and the points that would really drive home what we want to say. Because I feel it was perchance a bit too chaotic, and it took us some time to really get into expressing what we really want to say in some concise manner. But I still hope it was an interesting discussion. And yeah, maybe let's get into some closing remarks then.
Okay, yeah. Closing remarks. If there's one thing I want to just have at the end of this thing as a quote unquote message, is that if you're experiencing self-hatred, think deeply about it, and always keep in mind that no matter what your mind tells you, self-hatred is not the thing you think it is. It's not a way of absolution. It's not a way of catharsis. It's none of that. It's in its core narcissistic. I'm not saying it's the person's fault, but the action of self-hatred and the self-flagellation that comes with it is just a narcissistic poison that will make you worse and better. And nobody socially will see you more favorably because you're self-flagellating. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yes, that's very important, and something I would add to it, like you need a chivalric code of strife with that demon. It's not like self-hatred isn't something you can do a little of. It's something you must not touch at any cost. Like your consciousness, if you're depressed, will do its best to sell it to you as something noble or as something rational. It's never noble, it's never rational, it's always evil, it's always poison, it's narcissistic, it's self-destructive. You must do your best to just slay it, not to touch it, and look into its face for only as long as it takes it to run away to see how unmoved your expression is by its trickery.
Yes, perfectly put. And it's one of those few times when you speak more mythologically than I do. So that was a very nice way to close this. Okay. Yeah, so I hope that people like this stream. To you listening, it's not a stream, actually, it's a recording, but I hope that you like this podcast, this episode. And as we go on, I think this will become like this has the potential of becoming an established series. So yeah, guys, expect more from us, and we hope you enjoy.
Yeah, I can just repeat that. I hope you enjoyed that. It's something we'll discuss with Michael, because there's 2 ways we could go with that, and I would love to hear some feedback when it comes to that, because we could either make it a little bit more organized, and Michael was the force that tried to keep it organized, I think, whereas I was very much into, yes, let's go on to long tangents, because yeah, it's something I very much personally enjoy in our discussions. Yeah, and podcasts have very different concepts to it. Some are, more organized. Some are more tangent focused or main theme unfocused. And I think we could go both ways. And I'm just wondering whether this podcast felt like it needed more organization or less organization, because I have very mixed feelings about that, So yeah, I'm awaiting any feedback that you guys might have, and I hope it was. And I hope it was something that gave you some joy, even though it was quite raw as we were only starting,
To put that in a Petersonian way, and with that, tell us if you prefer chaos or order. We enjoy both, so yeah, that's pretty much so. Man, it was awesome doing this. Yeah, it was beautiful doing this. I'm going to stop the recording now. To everyone listening, thank you all very, very much for being with us.
Thank you. It was quite cool to